I should have known something was off the moment Becca's older brother looked at me like he was trying not to laugh. Not a polite smile. Not a surprised one. The kind of look that meant he already knew the punchline and was just waiting for me to catch up. Her name was Becca, full name Rebecca, but she'd stopped answering to that sometime around second year of university, and nobody had pushed it since. We'd been friends for 4 years, the kind that started by accident and stayed by choice. She was the first person I called when anything went sideways, and the last person I expected to have complicated feelings about. I'd done a decent job not naming those feelings, mostly by keeping busy and pretending the evidence didn't add up. We met at an outdoor gear sale at the Sport Check on Robson Street in Vancouver. I was reaching for a waterproof jacket on the clearance rack. So was she. She got there first, looked at the jacket, looked at me, and said, "You'd lose it in the first month anyway." I said, "That's a lot of confidence about someone you've never met." She shrugged. "It's a very impractical color for someone with your energy." I didn't know what that meant. I bought the jacket. I lost it 3 weeks later at a hockey game. I never told her that. After the gear sale, we kept running into each other. At the farmer's market on Granville Island. At a trivia night neither of us had planned to attend. At a coffee shop where we both ordered the same oat milk cortado, and both looked a little embarrassed about it. By the time we started texting to actually arrange things, it felt less like a new friendship and more like catching up on one we'd already started somewhere else. For 4 years, Becca was the person I talked to about everything. My job at the architectural firm downtown when it got to be too much. My dad's health scare 2 winters ago. The apartment I almost signed for but didn't, and how I still wasn't sure if I made the right call. She had opinions about all of it, usually delivered without softening them first, which sounds worse than it was. With Becca, honesty never felt like an attack. It felt like she actually cared what happened to you. People noticed, of course. My coworker Leon once watched me check my phone during a lunch break, smile at something, and immediately put the phone face down like I'd been caught. He didn't say anything. He just raised one eyebrow. I ignored him. That was the strategy. Becca had a close-knit family, the kind that did Sunday dinners without it being mandated and actually showed up when one of them needed help moving. Her older brother Matt worked in renewable energy and had the kind of easy, settled energy of someone who had figured out the big things and was comfortable with the rest. Her younger sister, Claire, was finishing her master's degree in education at UBC. Her parents had been married for 32 years and still bickered warmly about how to load a dishwasher, like it was a legitimate philosophical debate. I had known her family almost as long as I'd known Becca. Her mother, Ruth, liked me in the patient, observant way that slightly terrified me. She asked good questions and remembered the answers. That combination, in a person that perceptive, was either a comfort or a warning depending on the day. In late September, Becca's sister Claire defended her thesis. Ruth organized a small celebration at their family home in North Vancouver. Just family and a few close friends, dinner on the back deck, fairy lights strung over the cedar fence, the kind of gathering that looks effortless and takes 3 days to pull together. Becca texted me Friday morning, "You're coming Sunday. Don't make me ask twice, it's embarrassing." I replied that I'd already planned to come. Good. Also, can you bring those brownies from that bakery on commercial? Not the ones with the sea salt, the ones with the espresso. That's very specific. I know what I want. That was Becca, entirely, certain, specific, never apologizing for it. Sunday, I showed up at the Morrisons' house 20 minutes early, which Becca counted as late because she'd asked me to come at noon, and I arrived at 12:40. So technically, she had a point. I had the brownies in a paper bag and a bottle of BC Pinot Noir because Ruth had mentioned once that she liked it, and I'd filed that away without thinking too much about why. Becca opened the door before I got to the porch. She was wearing a rust-colored sweater and dark jeans, hair down, still holding a paring knife she'd clearly just been using. She looked at me, then at the bakery bag, and said, "You're late. I'm 20 minutes early, spiritually late. Is that a real category? For you it is." She stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled like roasted garlic and something sweet baking in the oven. The very specific scent of a family that cooked like it was an act of love rather than a chore. From somewhere deeper in the house, I could hear Claire laughing about something, and the low background commentary of what sounded like a hockey pregame show. I handed Becca the wine. She looked at the label. Osayus, she said. Good year. My mum's going to love this. I know. She looked at me for half a second longer than the moment required. Then she turned and headed toward the kitchen, and I followed, because that was what I always did. For the next hour, I helped Becca finish setting up, while Ruth moved efficiently between the kitchen and the deck. Claire periodically appeared to either help or report on the status of the hockey game, and Matt grilled salmon on the barbecue with the focused calm of a man who had been given one job and intended to do it perfectly. I carried things, arranged things, argued briefly with Becca about whether the cheese board needed a second type of cracker. It didn't. She was wrong, but she won because she always won. Her dad, Frank, found me in the kitchen at one point and asked about a project I was working on downtown, a mixed-use residential building near the waterfront. I had mentioned it months ago, once, in passing. He remembered the details. That ran in the family, apparently. By the time everyone was settled on the deck with food and drinks, the evening had that particular September quality, the light going amber and low, cool enough for a light jacket, warm enough to stay outside. Claire was talking about her plans after convocation. Ruth had finally opened the wine. Matt was telling some story about a wind farm site visit in Alberta that kept getting interrupted because nobody could agree on the best part. I was refilling my glass from the pitcher of water on the side table when I heard Ruth say from across the deck, "There he is." I looked up. She was sitting with Matt and one of Becca's aunts, her mom's sister, visiting from Kelowna. The aunt whose name I couldn't quite remember, which made me feel guilty. Ruth was looking at me with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for a specific moment and recognized it when it arrived. Becca was beside her, setting down a bowl of olives, already going still in a way that didn't match the rest of her. Ruth smiled, too warm, too knowing, and said, "This is the one she's always talking about." The deck didn't go quiet. The music kept playing, Claire kept talking to her dad, but something in my chest did. I looked at Ruth, then at Becca. Becca's face went red. Not flushed from the wind or the wine. Red in the way that only happens when something true has been said out loud in front of too many people, and there's no version of the next 5 seconds that isn't awful. "Mum," she said, very quietly. Ruth picked up her wine glass with the serenity of a woman who had decided this was happening tonight. "I'm just saying that I know more about this man's commute preferences than I know about most people Claire's brought home. Mum. And the coffee thing." Ruth glanced at her sister. "She's very opinionated about his coffee." Becca set the bowl down too hard. "I need to. I'm going to check on thee." She gestured vaguely at nothing specific and walked back into the house. I stood there holding my water glass like I'd been stationary for a long time and only just noticed. Because here's the part that actually hit me. Becca had looked mortified. Not annoyed. Not laughing it off. Mortified. The specific kind that happens when something is true, and you know the other person now knows it's true, and there's nowhere to go with that information. Ruth looked at me over the rim of her glass. Gentler now. She went inside. "Aisha," I said. "I noticed. You might want to go after her." I put the glass down on the side table. I went inside. I found Becca in the mudroom off the back hallway. Not hiding, technically. She'd picked up a dish towel and was folding it with great concentration, as though the structural integrity of the fold was a problem that required her full attention. The mudroom was exactly the kind of place you'd go if you needed 30 seconds of privacy, but wanted to maintain the fiction that you'd just stepped away to do something practical. Becca. She didn't look up. "Your timing is terrible. My timing's usually fine. Your timing is specifically terrible for situations like this." I leaned against the doorframe. "She really talks about me that much?" That got a reaction. Becca stopped folding the towel, held it in both hands, and closed her eyes for a second, like she was deciding something. Then she turned around. Her face was still flushed, and she was giving me the particular look that people wear when denial has become structurally unsound. When she spoke, her voice was quiet and very even. I really wish that was a harder question to answer. I didn't say anything. She looked down once, then back at me. In that mudroom, with the sounds of the deck drifting in through the window and someone's car going by on the street outside, my best friend said, "You can't actually be standing there surprised right now." I wasn't, entirely. That was the honest part. I had almost named it before. More than once. There were things I'd noticed and quietly cataloged without examining too closely. The way she got quieter when I mentioned going on dates, which I'd written off as disinterest in the topic. The way she'd texted me at 11 p.m. once to ask if I'd eaten dinner, not because anything was wrong, just because she'd had a feeling I'd worked through it. The way her family greeted me at the door like I was a fixture rather than a guest, which I'd taken as friendliness rather than inference. I said, "I'm not surprised." Becca looked up. "Why not?" "Because I think I've been doing the same thing." She stared at me. I kept going because stopping there would have been unkind. I went on a date last spring. She was great. Genuinely nice, interesting, good job, all of it. And halfway through dinner I thought, Becca would find something wrong with the menu just to have a conversation about it. And then I thought, I can't wait to tell Becca about this later. I paused, which is not a great thought to have in the middle of a first date. Becca's expression shifted. The mortification was still there, but something else had started coming through it, something more careful. "That's a very inconvenient thing to tell me," she said. "I know. You don't get to say that after I just got exposed by my own mother in front of my Aunt Sandra." "That's fair." "The coffee thing," she said. She really brought up the coffee thing. "What is the coffee thing?" Becca made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "You switched to oat milk 2 years ago because your doctor mentioned cholesterol. And I mention it, apparently, too often. Because I think it's a very you thing to do. You didn't complain, you didn't make it a whole thing, you just switched and moved on." She looked at me. "I find that. I find you. I don't know. I mention it. To my mother. More than once, apparently." I looked at her for a moment. "That's what the coffee thing is?" "Don't. I'm not laughing. You're about to. I'm genuinely not." And I wasn't. I was thinking about how Becca had remembered that. About how I hadn't even remembered telling her. About how she'd apparently been carrying that detail around long enough for it to come up more than once with her mother. "Okay," she said. "Your turn. My turn for what? You said you were doing the same thing, so. What's your version of the coffee thing?" I leaned back against the doorframe. "You have this green jacket. The one with the hood that folds wrong." She frowned. "I know which one. You wear it every fall. You've worn it 3 falls in a row. The zipper at the collar sticks when it's cold, and I've fixed it twice. Once in a parking lot outside a pub, and once in your hallway at like 11 at night." I looked at her. "I look for that jacket when I pick you up. I don't know when I started doing that. But I notice when you're wearing it, and I notice when you're not." Becca was very still. "It's a terrible jacket," I said. "Objectively. It's a great jacket. The zipper sticks. That's why I have you," she said without thinking, I could tell. The way it came out a little too quickly, and then she heard herself say it, and she looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between stricken and resigned. "Okay," she said quietly. "I said that. You did. You're not going to let me walk it back. I'm not going to make you walk it back." She laughed once, short, caught off guard by it, and then covered her mouth with the back of her hand, the way she did when she laughed at something she hadn't meant to find funny. When she lowered her hand, she looked steadier. Not all the way there, but closer. I stepped further into the mudroom. "Becca. Yeah. I should have figured this out before your mum did." She smiled a little. "That's not a high bar. Before your Aunt Sandra figured it out, still low. Before the salmon was done, that got her." She laughed properly this time, and once she did, something in the room shifted. Not lighter, exactly, but more honest. The kind of honesty that makes the next part easier even if it doesn't make it easy. I said, "You're the person I want to tell things to first. Anytime anything happens, good or bad or completely pointless, you're who I think of." I paused. I kept calling it friendship because that felt safe. Safer than the other word. "Safe for who?" she said. "For me. Because I didn't want to be wrong about what we were." She held my gaze. Out on the deck, I could hear Claire saying something about Okanagan wine being underrated, which sounded like a compliment Ruth had engineered. The city was quiet past the fence. Becca said, "You've been scared of losing this, the easy version of it," I said. "The part where you're just always there and I don't have to think about why." She looked down for a second, then up. Her voice was careful but not closed. "I've been scared of the same thing." "That's new information." "Is it?" I thought about the way she'd gone quiet in September when I mentioned someone from work. The way she'd been the first person to show up. after my dad got out of hospital, without being asked, with coffee and very little conversation, because she'd understood that was what I needed. The way she'd texted me once at 1 in the morning with just a link to a Wikipedia article about the history of corrugated metal roofing because she'd remembered I'd mentioned it in passing 2 months earlier and she'd thought I might still care. I said, "Do you want the embarrassing part?" She tilted her head. "That depends on whether it's embarrassing for you or for me. For me, entirely for me." Then, obviously, yes. I've been comparing every first date to you for 2 years. Not consciously, but if someone made a joke and I thought it was fine, but not as fast as you would have landed it, that was it. I was already somewhere else. I looked at her. That's an embarrassing amount of time to take to say it out loud. She was quiet for a moment. You're right. It is, thanks. I mean, yes, you took a long time. A long time. But she was almost smiling. For the record, I've been doing the same thing. Comparison shopping. Nobody wins. Nobody wins. I agreed. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, the opposite of uncomfortable, actually. The kind of pause where two people are both waiting to see who says the real thing first. I said it. How long? Becca looked at me. Since last winter. The power outage. I remembered the power outage. A late January storm, half the lower mainland without electricity for an afternoon. We'd sat in her apartment with every candle she owned lit and played card games by flashlight because neither of us wanted to leave, and neither of us said that was why. That was 8 months ago, I said. Yeah, you didn't say anything. Neither did you. I didn't know. I know you didn't. She looked at me steadily. That's the thing, though. I kept sending you information, and you kept filing it in the wrong folder. I thought about that. About the coffee thing. About the jacket. About all the small things she'd apparently been tracking about me that I hadn't known to count as signals because I hadn't been looking for them. I'm looking now, I said. Becca held my gaze. I stepped closer. She didn't move back. You're not just going to walk back out there and pretend that was a normal conversation, she said. No. Because if you do, I'm going to spend the whole drive home recalibrating and it will ruin the brownies. I'm not going to do that. Okay, I said, and then I kissed her. Not like I was nervous, though I was, a little. Like it was something I had already decided and was finally doing. It felt quiet and certain, and like something slotting into the right position after a long time of being slightly off. When I pulled back, Becca stayed close. Her eyes opened slowly. Okay, she said, softer this time. That's your review. I'm still processing. Take your time. She looked at me the way she looked at things she was deciding whether to trust. Then she said, my mum is going to be completely unmanageable about this. She already is. She's going to look at me across the dinner table with that face. You know which face. The one that means she was right, she's always right, which makes it worse. She was right this time, I said. Becca pointed at me. You're not allowed to take her side. I'm not taking sides. I'm acknowledging facts. She gave me a look that meant she was filing this objection for later, then leaned forward and kissed me again. Quicker, more deliberate, like she was checking whether the first one was an aberration. It wasn't. We stayed in the mudroom another minute, not saying anything, which felt appropriate. Then Becca straightened up and looked toward the hallway like she just remembered there were 12 people on the deck, and most of them were related to her. I can't go back out there yet, she said. You can. I look like I've just had a complete internal restructuring beside the winter coats. You look fine. That's not reassuring. That's just kind. I checked my watch. We've been in here 6 minutes. If we wait much longer, your mum is going to come find us. Becca looked pained. That's true. And she's going to look even more satisfied than she already does. Also true. So. She took a breath. Okay, but you walk out first. Give me 30 seconds. Why do I walk out first? Because if we walk out together, Matt's going to say something. Matt already knows, Becca. He looked at me like he knew before dinner. She stared at me. He did? When I came in. He made this face. A face that meant he was not surprised. She closed her eyes. I live in a family of spies. They're not spies. They just pay attention. Same thing. I smiled. She opened her eyes. For a second, she just looked at me. The way you look at something familiar that has just become new without either of you changing. And then she said, okay, let's go. We walked out together, down the hallway, through the kitchen, out the back door onto the deck. Ruth looked up from the table. She took one look at our faces, and then she set down her wine glass very precisely and said absolutely nothing, which was more eloquent than anything she could have said. Matt, who was clearing plates, glanced between us once and said, "About time." Claire looked up. "Oh, thank God. I was running out of ways to keep Mum occupied." Becca said, "You all knew." Claire said, "Becca, we've known since the power outage story. I told you that in confidence. You told me because you needed someone to tell. That's not confidence. That's processing out loud." Frank looked up from the end of the table with the expression of a man hearing something and deciding how much to engage. Then he shrugged once, the way he did when something made complete sense but didn't require commentary, and said, "Good. Now someone sit down. Claire's going to say something about her thesis, and we should all hear it." Becca sat down. I sat beside her, her knee pressed against mine under the table, and she didn't move it. Ruth picked up her wineglass again. She looked across the table at Becca with the carefully restrained expression of a woman who had been right and knew it, and was making a genuine effort not to announce that too loudly. She did not entirely succeed. But she tried. Matt refilled everyone's glasses. Claire started talking about her thesis committee and something that had almost gone sideways in the oral defense. And the conversation moved on the way it does in families that are good at absorbing information and getting back to the matter at hand. At some point in the evening, I looked over at Becca and she was already looking at me. She turned away immediately and pretended to be very interested in what Claire was saying. I looked back at my plate. 2 months later, I was at the Morrisons for Sunday dinner again. Same table, same back deck, now with a propane heater that Frank operated with the focused pride of a man who had researched the correct BTU output for a space this size. Same salmon, because apparently Frank had a method and wasn't interested in varying it. Same bickering about the dishwasher. Same beagle from next door who had worked out that the gap in the fence was still there. The only real difference was that Becca sat close enough for her shoulder to rest against mine, and nobody at the table treated this as new information. Ruth looked at us across the table at one point and said, with the specific serenity of a woman who had been patient for a very long time, "You're both staying for dessert." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Becca said. "Good." Ruth picked up her fork. "I made the cake with the espresso." Becca looked at me. I looked at her. The thing about finally saying the right thing is that it doesn't feel like a revelation when it happens. It just feels like the rest of your life making room.